Chapter 14: Gender and Leadership based on Northouse PG Leadership Theory and Practice. Sage Publications. Welcome back. In this video, we're exploring Chapter 14: Gender and Leadership. This chapter examines how gender roles, social norms, and structural inequalities affect leadership perceptions, experiences, and opportunities. It's a chapter about power, identity, and progress, and it challenges us to confront the subtle and systemic ways leadership has been shaped by gender over time. Let's begin. Why study gender and leadership? Understanding gender and leadership matters because leaders are often evaluated through a gendered lens. For decades, leadership was associated with masculine traits like assertiveness and control, while traits like empathy and collaboration were devalued. Women and people of all gender identities have historically faced barriers to access, recognition, and influence. This chapter explores where we've made progress and where challenges persist. The gender gap in leadership. Although women represent about half the workforce, they are underrepresented in top leadership roles, especially in business, government, and STEM fields. Common statistics include fewer women than men in executive and CEO positions, significant wage gaps across sectors, barriers to promotion known as the glass ceiling. However, we also see growing representation in education, healthcare, and nonprofit leadership. Gender and leadership styles. Research shows that women and men tend to use different leadership styles, though these differences are not absolute. On average, women are more likely to use transformational leadership, focusing on motivation, support, and development. Men are more likely to use transactional leadership, emphasizing task completion and reward systems. Women also tend to score higher in participative and democratic styles, while men are more likely to use directive or autocratic approaches. These patterns reflect both social conditioning and organizational expectations, not inherent ability. Leadership effectiveness. Meta-analyses show no overall difference in leadership effectiveness between men and women. However, effectiveness varies based on context, style fit, and follower expectations. In male-dominated industries, women often face higher scrutiny. In roles emphasizing interpersonal skills, women may be evaluated more favorably. Bottom line, effectiveness is not about gender. It's about how leadership is practiced and perceived in a given setting. Gender bias and prejudice. Gender stereotypes play a major role in shaping who we see as natural leaders. Men are stereotypically seen as assertive, decisive, independent. Women are often expected to be nurturing, supportive, collaborative. These stereotypes can lead to role incongruity when women are penalized for leading assertively. The double bind where women are seen as too soft or too aggressive, but rarely just right. Imposter syndrome, internalizing doubts in the face of bias. Bias affects hiring, evaluations, and access to opportunity, even when unintentional. Barriers to women's advancement. Common barriers include glass ceiling, invisible barriers to promotion. Glass cliff, women are promoted in risky or failing situations. Work, family conflict, imbalanced caregiving expectations. Lack of mentorship and sponsorship, fewer access points to informal power. Tokenism, being the only woman in a leadership group, leading to extra scrutiny. These aren't individual problems. They are structural issues that require organizational and cultural change. Strengths of women's leadership. Despite obstacles, research highlights several strengths in women's leadership. Higher use of transformational leadership, which is linked to follower development and motivation. Stronger skills in collaboration, emotional intelligence, and communication. Greater focus on ethics, team building, and inclusive practices. These strengths are increasingly valued in today's complex, diverse, and people-centered work environments. Intersectionality and inclusion. Gender is not a standalone identity. People experience leadership through the lens of race, class, sexual orientation, disability, and more. This is called intersectionality, a framework for understanding how multiple forms of identity and oppression intersect. For example, the leadership experiences of a white woman differ from those of a black woman, or a trans woman, or a woman with a disability. Inclusive leadership must recognize and respond to these differences, not ignore them. Strategies for closing the gap. To create equity in leadership, organizations can normalize flexible work policies and work life balance, invest in mentorship, sponsorship, and leadership pipelines, conduct bias training and inclusive hiring practices, hold leaders accountable for representation and culture, encourage allyship where men and other leaders use their privilege to create access. Change requires more than good intentions. It takes structural commitment and consistent action. Strengths of the gender and leadership perspective. It exposes bias that might otherwise go unnoticed. It challenges narrow definitions of leadership. It elevates undervalued leadership traits like empathy and collaboration. It supports a more inclusive, just leadership culture for all. Criticisms of the gender and leadership perspective. Some argue it overgeneralizes gender differences, ignoring individual variation. Others feel it can reinforce stereotypes, even as it tries to break them. There is less research on non binary and transgender leaders. Some fear it politicizes leadership in ways that distract from performance. Still, it opens space for a more reflective, equitable, and honest conversation about what leadership should be. Public health example. Imagine a public health department developing a leadership training program. An inclusive and gender aware leader would ensure the curriculum includes diverse leadership models, make space for underrepresented voices, acknowledge that leadership challenges are shaped by identity, not just skill, track outcomes by gender and intersectional data, not just titles. That's how leadership equity moves from theory to practice. Closing to wrap up. Gender affects how leadership is seen, practiced, and experienced. When we ignore gender, we risk reproducing inequality. When we understand it, we unlock more leadership potential for everyone. This video is based on Chapter 14 of Leadership, Theory and Practice by Peter Northouse. Coming up next, Leadership Ethics, where we'll explore how values and morality shape leadership decisions and dilemmas. Until then, lead inclusively, examine your lens, and make space for others to lead with you.